She once believed that living kindly and loving wholeheartedly would be enough, that goodness would always find its way back. But life is never that simple. When the person Emily cherished most became the one who brought her to her knees, she had to learn how to rise, not for revenge, but to find herself again. The late autumn light filtered through the tall windows of the downtown office building, casting long golden streaks across the polished hardwood floors. Emily Miller stood near her desk, one hand loosely gripping a mug of black coffee, the other scrolling through design drafts on her tablet. At 32, she had already built a reputation as one of Boston's most respected creative directors in the media industry, a woman whose vision could elevate even the most mundane concept into something quietly unforgettable. But what truly set Emily apart was not just her artistic instinct or her ability to lead a team with calm authority. It was her character, honest, graceful, unwaveringly kind. Colleagues often described her as the person you turned to when things fell apart, not just for solutions, but for the rare comfort of being understood without judgment. She remembered birthdays, stayed late to help interns struggling with tight deadlines, and wrote handwritten thank you notes long after the practice had become obsolete. Outside the office, her life was no less intentional. Emily lived alone in a compact ivy-draped townhouse in Beacon Hill, a space she had carefully filled with books, soft fabrics, and pieces of art collected from flea markets and forgotten galleries. She walked to work each morning, even in the biting New England wind, not out of habit, but because she liked to watch the city wake up. And then there was Claire. Claire Simmons had been Emily's best friend since college. Their bond had been forged over long nights in studio art classes and cemented through shared heartbreaks, mutual ambition, and the kind of intimate conversations that only happen between people who believe they will never be apart. Claire was the more magnetic of the two, witty, sharp, and always drawing others in with her confident charm. But underneath her brightness was a fragility that few people recognized. Emily did. When Claire's long-term relationship ended in chaos, a betrayal that left her nearly broken, most of their circle quietly distanced themselves, unsure how to deal with the aftermath. Emily did not hesitate. She let Claire move into her home for 6 months, gave her space when she needed silence and distraction when she needed anything but. She made dinners, talked her out of impulsive decisions, and defended her when others whispered cruelly behind closed doors. "It is just a phase," Emily would say, gently brushing off concern from coworkers who wondered why she was taking on so much. She would do the same for me. At the time, she believed it. Boston's creative industry was relentless, full of tight-lipped ambition and glossy smiles that often masked ruthless competition. Yet, in that whirlwind of pitches, campaigns, and ever-tightening deadlines, Emily had always carried herself differently. She believed in integrity, even when it cost her. She believed in people, especially those she loved. And no one, not even her closest colleagues, could have guessed how tightly she held on to that belief. Not even Emily herself, not yet. It had been nearly 2 years since Claire moved out of Emily's townhouse and into a modest loft in South End, the kind with tall ceilings, creaky floors, and just enough natural light to suggest possibility. Emily had helped her furnish it, scouring thrift shops for shelves and bar stools, driving across town to pick up a secondhand drafting table, even assembling the warped IKEA bed frame by herself when Claire gave up in frustration. Claire had once dreamed of being a full-time painter, her early works raw and electric with feeling. But after years of stalled gallery submissions and inconsistent sales, she had shifted to freelance marketing work for small lifestyle brands, her creativity now channeled into product slogans and color palettes approved by anxious startup founders. It paid the rent, barely, but it never lit up her face the way painting used to. Emily, sensing her friend's quiet defeat, did what she always did. She stepped in. When her own agency picked up a boutique skincare brand needing visual rebranding, she suggested Claire for the pitch deck designs. "She sees things differently," Emily told the client, "in the best way." Claire got the job, and then the next, and the next. Emily never asked for anything in return, not even acknowledgement. "She is brilliant," she would say over lunch meetings or in the elevator after client presentations, her voice steady, her loyalty unwavering. People just do not always know how to read brilliance right away. But not everyone agreed. A few members of Emily's team had raised concerns about missed deadlines, inconsistencies, moments of sharpness from Claire that felt more defensive than collaborative. Still, Emily protected her. She believed people needed time and kindness and room to grow, especially Claire. There were moments, though, fleeting but jarring, when Emily would catch something in Claire's expression that she could not quite name. A flicker of discomfort when Emily was praised in a meeting, a forced smile when Emily's name appeared on a shortlist for a national design award. Once, after a particularly successful pitch, Claire had murmured under her breath, "Of course they loved you. You always know how to say the right thing in the right dress." Emily had paused, unsure whether it was meant as a compliment or something else, but she had smiled, chosen not to dwell. Claire had been tired, stressed. Everyone said things they did not mean when the pressure was on. Still, small things began to accumulate. Claire grew increasingly private, shutting her laptop the moment Emily walked into the room. She canceled plans last minute without explanation. She made jokes that felt just a little too pointed about Emily's charmed career, her effortless reputation, or how some people just always get handed the best cards. Emily did not confront her. She told herself that friendships, like seasons, shifted, that proximity could breed friction, that perhaps Claire was just going through another rough patch. She tried harder, invited her to more dinners, brought her coffee on deadline nights, left notes on her desk with little sketches and reminders that she mattered. What Emily did not realize, what she could not imagine, was that the foundation of their friendship, built on trust and shared history, was already beginning to fracture. And beneath that quiet unraveling, something far more dangerous was beginning to take shape. The first snow had fallen in early December, dusting the city in quiet anticipation. Emily watched it swirl outside the tall windows of the agency's corner office as she stood before the polished conference table, her hand poised above a thick folder stamped with the blue and silver logo of Sentiva Technologies. It was the kind of account that could shift the direction of an entire career, an international tech firm seeking a complete rebranding for its consumer division, with a budget that made even the executive team nervous. Emily had been tapped to lead the creative strategy after a year of steadily rising acclaim. Her pitch had been bold, unorthodox, anchored not in the cold sterility of technology, but in emotional design, color psychology, and storytelling. It had worked. The board had responded with uncharacteristic warmth. The contract was hers to finalize. "Congratulations," the agency director had told her with a rare smile. "This will put your name on the map." And she had smiled too, because she wanted to feel proud. But the first person she called was Claire. "I want you in this with me," Emily had said that evening, pacing in her kitchen while pasta boiled untouched on the stove. "There's a visual development arm. We need someone with a strong artistic sense who understands instinct over instruction. I want you there." There had been a pause on the other end of the line, one beat too long, but then Claire's voice came through, soft and incredulous. "You are sure? A project like this?" "Absolutely," Emily said without hesitation. "You deserve this." The agency leadership was less enthusiastic. They wanted a vetted senior designer from their own roster, someone predictable. But Emily stood firm. She argued for fresh vision, for trust in unconventional talent. In the end, she won, though not without cost to her own credibility inside the office. It did not matter. She believed in Claire. That had always been enough. In the weeks that followed, the project team was assembled, and the tempo of the office shifted into something electric. Conference calls with European partners stretched late into the evening. Strategy boards grew cluttered with sketches, fonts, palettes. Emily's vision was taking shape, and Claire, seated beside her, was granted access to some of the most sensitive concept work. Key files were uploaded to a secure server. Claire received her own login credentials, and Emily trusted her completely, sometimes even forwarding documents directly, too swamped with meetings to manage the minutiae. They shared a language others did not. When Emily needed a last-minute mood board, Claire delivered. When clients hesitated on abstract concepts, Claire refined them with precise visuals. At least that was what Emily thought. There was one afternoon, barely noticed at the time, when she stepped out of a conference call early and returned to find Claire at her desk, hastily closing a screen. She looked up, smiled, and said, "Just organizing some drafts. Nothing major." Emily had nodded, distracted, and moved on. She never thought to ask more. She never imagined she would need to. It happened on a Tuesday. Emily remembered the light in the office that morning, how it slanted gold across the conference table, how the air seemed oddly quiet for such a critical week. The final presentation for Centeva's executive board was only days away. Everything was timed with surgical precision. The designs were finalized, messaging locked, assets secured. Emily arrived early as always, her mind already half inside the pitch, rehearsing phrasing, imagining the client's response. She was mid-sentence in a meeting when her assistant slipped into the room, face pale, and whispered something into her ear. A breach. That was the word used. By noon, it was everywhere. Centeva's unreleased branding assets, colors, logos, tagline options, had been leaked to a design blog notorious for its industry scoops. Within hours, side-by-side comparisons surfaced, showing how alarmingly similar a competitor's pitch, presented the previous day, mirrored Emily's campaign almost exactly. The damage was immediate. Centeva issued a curt statement postponing the contract signing. The agency's legal team descended like a wave, demanding access to file logs, user activity, project histories. Emily stood in the center of it all, stunned, trying to explain what she herself did not understand. "I would never compromise client trust," she said to the board, her voice steady but distant, as if speaking from underwater. "My systems are secure. My process—" "You were the last person to upload final designs," someone cut in. "Which means nothing," she replied too calmly. "I authorized access to my team. Files moved through several hands. But names were not being mentioned aloud. Not yet." That evening, her access to internal systems was frozen. Her keycard stopped working. She was told to step back until the internal investigation reached a conclusion. The silence afterward was worse than the fallout. The agency's leadership offered no statements of support. Investors began pulling inquiries. Clients grew quiet. Her inbox, once filled with gratitude and praise, went still. Emily watched her career unwind in real time, like thread slipping through open fingers. Claire was the only one who stayed. She came by that night with wine and takeout and a nervous smile. Her eyes were already glassy when Emily opened the door. "This is insane," Claire said, dropping the bag on the kitchen counter and pulling Emily into a hug. "You? Sabotage? It is laughable." Emily said nothing. Her body stiffened involuntarily beneath Claire's embrace. Her mind was still spinning, trying to arrange the pieces of what had gone wrong. Claire sat with her that night on the living room floor, their backs against the couch, the city lights blinking beyond the frosted windows. She listened, nodded, poured more wine, cursed the agency, cursed the industry, cursed the endless grind. At one point, she took Emily's hand and said, "You are going to be okay. You are the most brilliant person I know." Emily managed a smile, weary but grateful. In that moment, she believed Claire meant it. What she did not see, could not have seen, was the flicker behind Claire's eyes when she turned away. Something colder, something calculating. The betrayal had already taken root, and its bloom would be devastating. The days that followed blurred into a kind of numb routine. Long mornings spent at home with unanswered calls, afternoons in cafes with her laptop open but untouched, and nights staring at the ceiling, replaying meetings and emails like fragments of a broken film reel. Emily told herself it was temporary, a misunderstanding. The truth would surface. It had to, but the silence persisted. She began to revisit the files, not out of suspicion at first, but from an obsessive need to understand what had happened. What she found, buried beneath layers of edits and timestamps, made her pause. One design mock-up, an early version of the visual branding, had been accessed, copied, and exported at an unusual hour long after business hours. The activity log showed Claire's name. Emily stared at the screen, frowning. Maybe it was nothing. Claire often worked late. Maybe she was just reviewing something on her own time. Still, she made a note of it. Then she found another anomaly, a set of image assets marked Final Draft. Identical to the ones that had surfaced in the leak, had been downloaded from the secured drive using Claire's credentials. 3 days before the breach was discovered. Her pulse quickened, but she said nothing, not yet. Instead, she called Claire. It rang twice before going to voicemail. She tried again later. No answer. When Claire finally responded the next morning, her tone was brisk, distracted. "Sorry, I've been swamped with this new pitch from that home goods brand. I barely slept last night." "I just wanted to talk," Emily said. "I found something odd in the project files. Thought maybe you could help me make sense of it." A pause. Then Claire replied too quickly, "Sure, let me get through today and I'll swing by tomorrow, or the next day. I just really need to meet this deadline first." Emily said okay. She hung up slowly, the phone still in her hand for a long time after. She tried to shake the unease, but it clung to her like damp fabric. And what frightened her most was not the growing suspicion. It was how fiercely her own mind fought against it. Claire had lived with her. Claire had cried on her shoulder. Claire had been there when no one else was. She remembered the nights she cooked for her, listened to her heartbreaks, championed her when no one else would. Claire had once whispered, after a sleepless night during the breakup, "You are the only person I trust not to abandon me." Emily had believed it. She had worn that sentence like a badge. But now, memory felt like something cracked at the edges, fragile and sharp, refusing to fit cleanly into the present. She wanted to be wrong. She needed to be wrong, because the alternative was unthinkable. And yet, deep down, a voice she could no longer ignore was beginning to whisper, "What if this whole time, the person you were protecting was the one quietly unmaking you?" The truth revealed itself not in a dramatic confession or a sudden confrontation, but in the quiet, methodical work of a sleepless night. Emily had grown accustomed to insomnia since the suspension. She no longer bothered to try sleeping through the dark hours. She simply lit a candle, wrapped herself in a shawl, and sat at her kitchen table with her laptop in silence. That night, the wind howled outside like something alive, rattling the windows. Her tea went cold as she dug deeper into the server logs, into archive folders she had not touched in months. It was almost an accident, a misnamed audio file buried within a shared folder from the early project weeks. Ref notes to a final MP3. She clicked it out of habit, expecting a client briefing or creative discussion. What she heard instead made her heart stop. Claire's voice, unmistakable. "I know it's risky," she was saying, her tone calm, collected, disturbingly free of hesitation. "But I cannot wait around for a break that may never come. This project, hers, it is beautiful. It is already done. All I have to do is hand it over." There was a pause, a low voice replying, muffled, male, indistinct. Claire again, clearer now. No, she will not suspect. She never has. Emily trusts people the way some people believe in God, quietly, blindly, and that trust is the reason she will fall. Emily froze. Her hands trembled, the air in the room suddenly too thin. She replayed it 3 times to be sure she was not imagining what she had heard. But there was more. The recording shifted, different tone, different setting. Claire's voice again, but softer, confessional, almost wistful. "You know, I used to love her. I really did. In college, she saved me. From myself, from everything. She told me I deserved better, that I deserved to be happy." A shaky breath and then bitterness. She said those things to him too. She said he deserved someone who would not destroy him. "He left me the next week. jumped off the bridge a month later, and everyone told me it was not my fault, but I knew. She planted the seed." Emily sat back in her chair as if struck. Her mind reeled. "I never told her," Claire continued, "because I wanted to see how far she would go, how perfect she could become, and then I wanted to be the one to break it, to take it all." The recording ended with the sound of a chair scraping. Nothing else, just a void. Emily closed her laptop with shaking hands, her breath coming too fast, too shallow. The kitchen around her felt foreign, like the set of a life that no longer belonged to her. The betrayal was no longer abstract. It had a voice, a reason. And it was not ambition or greed or even desperation. It was grief, warped, buried, festering grief, twisted into vengeance. Claire had not just wanted to ruin Emily's career. She'd wanted to dismantle the very idea of Emily, her goodness, her kindness, her faith in people. The truth felt like a blade, sliding slow and cold between her ribs. Emily stood in the quiet and let it bleed. The recording haunted her. Long after the file had been closed, long after the candle on her kitchen table had burned down to its last flicker, Claire's voice remained, threaded through Emily's thoughts like smoke, inescapable, choking. She heard it in the shower, in the spaces between footsteps, in the silence just before sleep never came. "I used to love her, and then I wanted to be the one to break it." Emily did not cry, not at first. She walked around her home as if it belonged to someone else, brushing her fingers along bookshelves, watering plants she had once loved, letting the kettle boil dry on the stove. Grief had come before in her life, but never like this. Not like a betrayal so intimate it hollowed out the very center of her. She thought about confronting Claire. A dozen times she rehearsed it. The words would be quiet, measured, devastating, but each time she imagined Claire's face, not the one from the recording, but the face from the nights they sat on that couch, laughing over cheap wine, the one that used to look at her with such unguarded gratitude, and the air was knocked from her lungs. Other times, she fantasized about vanishing, leaving Boston, deleting her accounts, moving somewhere no one knew her name, a coastal town maybe, a job that required nothing but her hands. She imagined herself as someone anonymous, someone untouched by betrayal, someone who had never believed so completely in someone else. But then the guilt came, not for Claire, for herself. She had been so sure that doing the right thing, being kind, being generous, those were enough to make a life worthwhile. And now? Her goodness had been used as a weapon. Her compassion, her loyalty, all twisted into tools for revenge. She had handed her trust over like a gift, and Claire had unwrapped it with a knife. Emily began to question everything, her instincts, her worth, her capacity to judge the people around her. If someone like Claire could spend years smiling beside her while secretly sharpening the blade, what did that say about Emily's ability to truly know anyone? She stopped answering calls, ignored messages from colleagues who still dared to check in. Her world shrank to the rooms of her house and the flicker of light between blinds. Sleep came in short, jagged bursts. Meals became an afterthought. The only sound some days was the low hum of the fridge, the occasional creak of wood settling under winter air. And then one evening, sitting alone on the floor of her studio room, surrounded by sketches she had not touched in months, she whispered aloud to no one, "Maybe I made it too easy. Maybe I wanted to believe she needed me so badly that I ignored who she really was." The words hung in the air, raw and heavy. Her voice cracked on the last syllable. It was the first time she allowed herself to feel the full weight of it, not just the loss, but the shame, the humiliation of being so completely, foolishly loyal, of defending someone who had been dismantling her in secret. She pressed the heels of her hands into her eyes as if pressure could contain what wanted to break. Somewhere deep inside her, a voice began to murmur, quiet but persistent, "Stand up. Do not let this be the end of you." But she was not ready yet, not tonight. The turning point came not with a grand revelation, but with something small, A scrap of paper, a sketch she had started months ago, half finished, found curled under a pile of unopened mail on the floor of her studio. It was just a simple pencil line, soft and precise. The beginnings of a woman's profile, a gesture in the tilt of her head that carried sadness and defiance all at once. Emily stared at it for a long time before she touched it, afraid it would dissolve in her hands like so many other things had. But it did not. That evening, she picked up a pencil again. The strokes were hesitant at first, her hand unfamiliar with movement that had once felt like breathing. But soon something loosened. She sketched until her wrist ached, until the heaviness in her chest lifted enough to allow one deep, full breath. The next morning, she painted. It did not fix everything. Nothing did. But it was the first moment she felt the faintest flicker of herself again. Not the shattered, grieving version who had disappeared into that long winter of silence, but the woman she had built over years of work, of vision, of love. She began therapy quietly without telling anyone. The sessions were slow, raw, often filled with long pauses and unspoken grief. Some days she said little. Other days she spoke until her throat went dry. Her therapist never rushed her, never filled the space with empty comfort. And in that silence, Emily started to find clarity. She began to write, not to share, not for anyone else, but just to record what had happened. Not just the betrayal, but the before. She wrote about the nights she stayed up with Claire after her boyfriend left, about the time she lent her money for rent without ever expecting it back, about the laughter that used to come so easily between them. She wrote it all down in long, looping script, not to justify her trust, but to honor the parts of herself she had once given freely. Each page became a quiet reclamation, a way of saying, "This was real. I was real." In time, she joined a local creative collective, one that welcomed artists of all kinds. Sculptors, textile makers, painters with ink-stained fingers, and stories too heavy to carry alone. They asked no questions about her past. They only asked what she was working on now. Emily began showing up twice a week, then 3, then more. One afternoon, as she stood before a new canvas, brush poised, music playing low in the background, she realized she no longer felt the urge to hide. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer governed her. She could look at her own reflection without shame. The scars were still there, but so was the woman who had survived. She stopped thinking about revenge. It had never been in her nature. But she did begin to think about truth, not for punishment, but for clarity, for her name, her work, her dignity. Claire had taken from her in secret. Emily would reclaim in the open, not with fury, but with quiet precision. Not to destroy, but to restore. It was late spring by the time Emily returned to the agency building, the familiar glass doors gleaming beneath a sky just beginning to bloom with warmth. She had not walked through them in months. The place looked the same, but the air felt different, thinner, heavier, as if it too remembered. She had not come for redemption, only resolution. The file was ready, organized, time-stamped, unarguable. The audio recording, the server logs, a brief, concise statement outlining the chain of access, the timeline of events, and the undeniable thread that connected Claire to the breach. It had taken her weeks to prepare, not out of hesitation, but because she wanted to be exact, clean, untouchable. She delivered the package quietly through the legal liaison. No dramatic speech, no names whispered in hallways. Then she went home and waited. It did not take long. Within 48 hours, Claire was summoned. Emily did not attend the internal hearing. She did not need to. She knew how Claire operated, how she wielded charm like armor, how she could tilt her voice to sound wounded, sincere. But this time, there was more than suspicion and memory. There was proof. At first, Claire denied everything. With poised confidence, she called it confusion, a mistake, a smear campaign by a disgruntled peer. She smiled, offered alternate explanations, claimed sabotage, and then they played the recording. The room, as it was later described to Emily by someone who had once doubted her, went utterly still. There was no way to explain it away, No version of context that could justify what was said. Claire's voice cold and unguarded. She trusts people the way some believe in God, quietly, blindly, and that trust is the reason she will fall. After that, there was no fight left in her, no polished denial, just a single final line before she was dismissed. She had everything. I just took back what should have been mine. It spread quickly after that. The agency announced her termination. The partner contracts she had brokered were withdrawn within the week. A short article surfaced online, a professional blog. Nothing scandalous, just the facts. Names withheld. But the industry is small. Whispers louder than headlines. Emily read none of it. She spent that day in the collective studio, working on a piece she had started weeks ago. Thick brushstrokes in dark blue, interrupted by sudden strikes of white. She listened to the quiet murmur of the space, the soft clatter of tools, the warmth of people who had only known her as she was now, not as the woman whose world had come undone. Her phone buzzed with messages, former colleagues, apologies, gratitude, even a few offers. She turned it face down. Justice, when it came, had not brought relief, but it had brought something else, a kind of clearing, a silence where something new might begin to take root. She stood at the canvas and did not look back. The days moved quietly after that. Claire vanished from every corner of the internet within a week. Her professional pages went dark. Her portfolio site, once filled with curated images and quotes about growth and resilience, was taken offline. No final post, no explanation, just absence. Emily did not search for her. There were emails, of course, and calls. Industry blogs wanted statements. A few magazines reached out, eager to frame her as a symbol of dignity, betrayal, resilience. Former colleagues offered quotes, praise, even public alignment. People who had once kept their distance now stepping forward, eager to be seen on the right side of the story. Emily declined them all. "This does not need to be a headline," she told one persistent reporter. "I want this story to end, not to become a life sentence for anyone." She meant it. What had happened would always live inside her, but she refused to turn her pain into performance. To her, healing had not come from proving Claire wrong. It had come from choosing not to carry her any further. Some of Claire's old friends reached out. They came with hushed voices and complicated expressions, offering apologies that stumbled over themselves. Emily accepted them with quiet grace, but never bitterness. There was nothing left to defend, no anger to throw back. She had already walked through fire. She had no desire to linger in the smoke. Spring deepened. The studio grew fuller with light and laughter. Emily's work evolved. Less restrained now, bolder in color, unapologetically textured. Her paintings stopped resembling answers. They became questions, layered and open-ended, honest in a way she had once been afraid to be. And then, one late afternoon, she found an envelope slipped beneath the door of the studio. No return address. Just her name written in ink that wavered slightly, as though the hand behind it had hesitated. Inside, a single page. "If I could go back, I still do not know if I would forgive, but at least I was once saved by you." There was no signature. She read it once, then again, and instead of trying to guess who had sent it or what it meant, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in the back of her sketchbook. Not as proof, not as closure, just as a reminder that even when the people we love betray us, the love we gave them still mattered. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The sea was never still, and Emily found comfort in that. Each morning, the waves broke against the shore just outside her studio windows, sometimes gentle, sometimes wild. The air here smelled of salt and pine, of something clean and undemanding. In the small coastal town where she had quietly resettled, she was not the woman from the agency or the name behind the scandal. She was simply Emily, the woman who painted, who brought watercolors to the elementary school on Thursdays, who sat barefoot in the sand with a sketchbook in her lap and sunlight on her shoulders. She named the studio Second Light not for drama, but for truth, because that was what it felt like like stepping into a life that glowed softer than the first, but deeper too, less urgent, more honest. Here she did not strive to be extraordinary. She was content to be whole. The studio filled with children's laughter during the day and quiet contemplation in the evenings. Locals wandered in to see her work, abstracts shaped by memory and quiet resilience, colors that whispered stories only she fully understood. A retired fisherman once stared at a dark canvas streaked with silver and said, "Feels like standing in the middle of a storm and knowing it'll pass." She had smiled and replied, "That is exactly it." She no longer checked industry updates. The version of herself that once lived in glass buildings and boardrooms felt distant, like someone she had written about but never been. And yet, that woman was not gone. She lived in the lines of Emily's hands, in the way she still paid attention to details no one else saw, in the kindness that had grown quieter but not smaller. Then, one evening during an open studio exhibit, she felt it, a shift in the air. She had been speaking with a couple about brush textures when, over their shoulders, she caught a glimpse, a flash of auburn hair, the line of a jaw that memory knew too well. A figure standing at the edge of the room, just beyond the light, hands clasped in front of her, still, watching. Emily's breath caught, but she did not move. The figure lingered for only a moment before turning and slipping back into the crowd. No words, no message, no need. Emily did not follow. Instead, she turned back to the couple and picked up the conversation where she had left off. Later, when the last guests had gone and the space was quiet again, she stood by the door, looking out at the moonlit street, and she smiled. Not because she had been seen or forgiven or even understood, but because, for the first time in a long time, she felt no weight pressing on her chest, no echo of shame chasing her shadow. She had nothing to prove, nothing left to defend, and if that had been Claire, well, then so be it. Let her carry whatever pieces she still held. Emily no longer needed to carry them too. She turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked home beneath a sky scattered with stars, the sea murmuring beside her like an old friend. There would be new mornings, new work, new people perhaps, or not. It did not matter. She had already come back to herself, and in the quiet, in the steady rhythm of her own breath, she knew she did not need forgiveness to be free, because she had already forgiven the one person who needed it most, herself.